Good morning. Thank you for joining today. We'll give folks just another minute. Um, Go ahead and log in, get admitted to our meeting. All right, great. Well, this is really exciting. Thank you for joining today. Um, my name is Adrienne Harrison, and I serve as the Catalyst Program Manager at the Northern Border Regional Commission. We have a few of our team members online today. I'll point out Andrea Smith. She's our program director here at NBRC. We also have Sarah Demers. She's our program coordinator at NBRC, and she will be monitoring the chat box for any questions. So I do want to make sure folks are aware you're welcome to use the chat box. We will, of course, have dedicated times to take questions live. But if something comes to you along the way, feel free to enter it there. I'll also point out that we have Steve Fortier here. He's with New Hampshire's Department of Business and Economic Affairs. We'll be hearing some from him as well today. So thank you for joining, Steve. Um, I'm guessing you all know why we're here. This is the New Hampshire specific session focused on the Catalyst program for 2024. And we've got a number of topics to cover. I promised yesterday in our program overview that we would go into a lot of detail today. So let me go ahead and share our slides. Okay, great. Hopefully you all can see this. I will remind everyone that this session is being recorded. The webinar will be made available after today. It will probably be posted later this week to our website. And so the slides, the chat with all of the questions and answers, along with the recording of the webinar will be available for your future reference. So feel free to share with anyone too who couldn't make it today. Please keep your lines on mute. We will have time during the session where you're welcome to come off mute and ask questions. But overall, please keep your mics on mute. And again, feel free to use the chat feature for any questions. Okay, so here we go. These are the topics we'll be covering today. Again, going over the Catalyst program, some of the intro information, and then really digging in pretty deep to determining eligibility for NBRC funding and the eligible purposes for the Catalyst program. We'll also be going into details around the pre-application. I think that's probably what everyone's most excited about. So we will be really digging into the pre-application materials today. And we'll also go over kind of what's next after today. So the Catalyst program, this is the second year NBRC is offering the Catalyst program. The purpose of this program is really to stimulate economic growth and inspire partnerships that improve rural economic vitality across the NBRC region. For those of you that may not be familiar with Catalyst, some examples of projects that Catalyst has supported in the past. Certainly this is not the full breadth of types of projects supported by Catalyst, but just to kind of give you a taste and flavor of what we see funded through Catalyst, modernizing and expanding water and wastewater systems, transportation infrastructure, so anything from pedestrian and bike paths to crosswalks and sidewalks to new roads, any type of transportation infrastructure, establishing workforce development programs and facilities, growing our outdoor recreation infrastructure. This has been a particularly big one in New Hampshire. And then constructing new childcare and healthcare facilities. So you may have seen our program announcement for Catalyst for this year. And NBRC anticipates making at least $50 million available in 2024 across 2 rounds of funding for Catalyst projects. We don't yet have our federal fiscal year 2024 budget. Um, we are anticipating adding to the $50 million that we have available currently. We don't have a number that we can share at this time, but when we do receive our fiscal appropriations, we will issue a revised program announcement to share that revised total um, for the Catalyst program. Sorry, I was just admitting a few people to the meeting. Oops. Okay. And so new this year, for those that are familiar with Catalyst from last year, we had a single funding round that ended up with 44 million allocated across the region in projects. And this year we will be awarding 2 funding rounds. So we have a spring round scheduled, which is coming right up, and a fall funding round. So this is really exciting for NBRC to be able to offer. We feel it really offers a little flexibility to interested applicants. Some of you may have projects you're kind of interested in developing, but they might not be quite ready for that March 15th pre-application deadline. So we're excited to give a little more time for projects to come together. And right now, again, I think this may change with a revised announcement, but right now we have 30 million available in the spring round with 20 million available in the fall round. Okay. So we have a pre-application process for the Catalyst program this year. It's very similar to previous years. We've had the letters of interest process. Um, it's extremely similar to the letter of interest. And so a lot of the details we go through today, you may recognize, but there are some differences and we'll be sure to highlight those. The pre-application is required to submit a full application for for Catalyst funds. And the first round of spring pre-applications are due on March 15th. All pre-applications for all of NBRC's funding programs must be submitted using our brand new online grants management system, and we'll talk more about that today as well. Also new this year is that all of the waiver requests associated that may be associated with your pre-application are due with your pre-application. In previous years, some of our waivers were due at different times in the process. To make it easy and clear, all waiver requests will be due at the time of pre-application, and we will go through those as well. You know, part of the pre-application process is that both NBRC and the state programs will review them. NBRC really focuses on eligibility, and state programs focus on alignment with priorities in the review process. So we'll go through that as well. And then after the review process, we'll talk about the potential responses that you'll receive from NBRC. Okay, let's keep going. So eligibility, for those of you that participated yesterday in our overview session, some of this is repetitive, but I just wanted to make sure no one missed these details. And so we'll try to move through quickly. Here we go. So there are 3 sort of steps, 3 points to our eligibility review for projects. The first is the location eligibility. So only certain locations are eligible to receive NBRC funds. And here you'll see the NBRC service area. There are 60 counties across the 4-state region that make up our service area. And those are identified in our enabling legislation. You can see New Hampshire's counties depicted here. Annually, NBRC assesses each county for the level of economic and demographic distress. And so there's a number of distress categories that we collect data on and review. Those are published in our 2024 distress criteria document on the website. Some of those distress categories include the percent of population below the poverty level, unemployment rate, and percent change in population. We have some secondary distress categories that NBRC also looks at, including the percent of population with a bachelor's degree or higher, median household income, and percent of secondary or seasonal homes. So if you're, curious how we come up with these designations, those are, an overview of the categories, but there's a lot more detail available in that report I mentioned. So each of the counties in New Hampshire are reviewed using those criteria and designated as either distressed, transitional, or attainment. And this is the second eligibility sort of indicator. So distressed and transitional counties are eligible to receive NBRC funding. Distressed counties are eligible for what we call an 80-20 reimbursement match ratio. So the level of distress also impacts the required minimum match for a project. The transitional counties are eligible for a 50-50 reimbursement match ratio. And then attainment counties are ineligible to receive NBRC funds unless one of three exceptions apply. And I'll go ahead and walk through those three exceptions because New Hampshire does have an attainment county. Grafton is an attainment county. So within Grafton, we go ahead and apply those same distress criteria to each of the municipalities within that county. And if some of the municipalities are experiencing those distress categories, we classify them as isolated areas of distress. And that full list of communities is available in that report I referenced, the 2024 distress criteria. There are a number of communities within Grafton County that have been designated isolated areas of distress. So that will be important to consult. The second exception is for projects that bring benefits to surrounding distressed and transitional counties. This requires what we call a significant benefit waiver. So a project outside of a distressed or transitional county that brings significant benefits to the surrounding distressed or transitional counties may apply for the significant benefits waiver at the time of pre-application. So this is something that would be due when you submit your pre-application. And the details are all available in the program user manual for Catalyst, but generally this waiver requires a description of the benefits that will accrue to the distressed or transitional counties. And this waiver is submitted with your pre-application, and then the federal co-chair as well as the 4 state alternates are responsible for reviewing and approving waiver. The third exception is if the project is part of a multi-county or multi-state project that includes at least one distressed or transitional county. So if your project is in an attainment county, there are potential exceptions for receiving NBRC funds. And of course, if you need help navigating this information, feel free to reach out to NBRC. We'll share the email address at some point in this presentation, but it's admin@nbrc.gov, and we can help you understand any sort of exceptions to the attainment county. Okay. So this is a summary of determining your eligibility and your match requirements. The third sort of point of eligibility is whether or not your organization is an eligible applicant or a co-applicant. And so this is all available in our Catalyst program materials, but generally state governments, local governments, what we term subdivisions of state. You may be familiar with regional planning commissions, other sort of authorities of the state, tribes, federally recognized tribes, as well as nonprofit tribal entities are eligible to apply for NBRC funds, and all 501c nonprofit organizations. Really, the ineligible applicants are for-profit entities, LLCs, other entities that are not a 501c. Those are not eligible to apply for NBRC funds. They're also not eligible to receive any sort of pass-through of federal funds, NBRC funds, through an eligible applicant. And we'll talk more about that as well. Another point of eligibility NBRC reviews is related to any open or active NBRC awards. So an eligible applicant that does have an open NBRC award cannot receive an additional NBRC investment until that award has been has submitted reimbursement requests of 75% or more and demonstrated that 75% of the cost share or match has been spent before pre-application deadline. So if you know you have an open award, you're interested in applying for NBRC, you're going to want to go ahead and confirm what your reimbursement status is for that award. If you've not reached the 75% expenditure requirement, you can apply for a waiver. It's lovingly called the 75% expenditure waiver. And this also must be submitted together with the pre-application. It's new this year that the 75% expenditure requirement crosses all programs. In previous years, it only applied to Catalyst awards. So if you do have an award with another NBRC program, such as the Forest Economy Program, this does apply to those open awards. And in general, this waiver includes a description of the status and progress of the current award. The state program is actually responsible for approving the 75% expenditure waiver. Okay, and the final waiver. So all of Catalyst program awards require the use of a local development district for administering the grant. Some of the services that the LDD provides as part of that include support for quarterly reporting, reimbursement requests, your final reporting, and other assistance with understanding NBRC procurement policies. So they're really helpful, super knowledgeable. It's a requirement that NBRC have Catalyst program awards use LDDs. However, there are a few exceptions. One, if you're a state government entity or an LDD yourself, you're automatically exempt from that requirement. If your organization has a strong capacity for federal grant administration, you may be interested in applying for an LDD waiver. And this must be submitted, again, at the time of pre-application. Okay, so moving into some details about eligible sort of project categories for the Catalyst program. There are 7 project categories that fit nicely within our sort of infrastructure or construction and supportive infrastructure bin and our non-infrastructure project bin. Infrastructure includes 4 categories. We have basic public infrastructure, We have transportation, renewable energy, and telecommunications. These are really well described in our program manual. Um, we have some examples as well of project types for each of those categories. So rather than me sit here and read those definitions, I really encourage you to go to the Catalyst Program User Manual, which I should have probably started out by saying is on our Catalyst program page. So when you go to the nbrc.gov website, you'll navigate to the program areas, then select Catalyst program. And at the bottom of that page, there are important resources for the program, including the user manual. So if you haven't found that yet, this would be a great time to go ahead and navigate over there. And you're welcome to review these definitions. And if you come up with questions, I'm here, we're all here to answer those. So the categories within our non-infrastructure set of projects include business and workforce development, basic healthcare, and resource conservation, recreation, and tourism. So you may be wondering where your project idea fits. And I promised yesterday that I would walk through a lot of details on how to classify your project. It's important to classify your project or understand where your project falls, because that is how the maximum award size is determined for your project. Um, Non-infrastructure projects have a maximum award size of up to $500,000. Infrastructure projects have a maximum award size of up to $1 million. And there is a additional criteria for infrastructure projects that if your project meets the eligibility, you may be, the maximum award size would be $3 million. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through the sort of detailed decision support questions to help you navigate and understand the project classification that we apply here at NBRC. These questions will be available in the slides after today. They're also within the frequently asked question document. Okay, so if you may have a feeling that your project is an infrastructure project, you're going to want to check to see that your project aligns with one of the infrastructure categories and that your project is primarily construction. So if you're able to answer yes to both of those questions, the project is considered infrastructure by NBRC, and the maximum award would be $1 million. So all infrastructure projects must be construction in support of an infrastructure category. The next thing you would want to do is take a look at the higher maximum infrastructure determination to assess your eligibility for that additional $2 million. If your answer to one or both of these questions is no, the project is likely considered non-infrastructure by NBRC. You're going to want to go ahead to that decision tree to make sure that that's true. And the maximum award for non-infrastructure is $500,000. Okay, so you do have an infrastructure project and you're curious, do I meet the criteria for that higher maximum award amount? So these are the questions you would want to ask. Does the infrastructure project include construction in 2 or more jurisdictions? This means that physically there's construction supporting that infrastructure category in 2 or more places. If you answer yes, that project is eligible for a higher maximum award amount. The other potential situation or determination for a higher maximum would be if your infrastructure project, supports one or supports two or more infrastructure categories. So I shared with you earlier the categories. We have basic public infrastructure, transportation, telecommunications, and renewable energy. So if you have a project that is um, looking to address at least two infrastructure categories at the same time, um, you would be eligible for up to that higher maximum award amount up to 3 million. If you answer no to both questions, then your project is eligible for the maximum of $1 million. It is not eligible for the higher maximum infrastructure amount. So hopefully those questions um, help everyone understand how you are eligible for that higher amount. Okay, so you think you might have a non-infrastructure project. You're going to want to answer if the project aligns with a non-infrastructure category. If the answer is yes, great. You're considered a non-infrastructure project with the maximum award amount of 500,000. For those projects that are proposed under basic healthcare or outdoor recreation, you are going to want to review what we call the expanded basic public infrastructure definition or determination to see if your project may apply as an infrastructure project. And if you answered no to the question, your project does not align with a non-infrastructure category, and your project does not align with an infrastructure category, you may not be eligible for a Catalyst Program Award. So you're going to want to kind of reevaluate the Catalyst program and the definitions of our project categories. Maybe there's another program that's more applicable for your project that you can review, but sometimes a project just does not fit within a Catalyst category. Here is the expanded basic public infrastructure determination I just mentioned. If your basic healthcare or outdoor recreation project is primarily construction, if that answer is yes, you're eligible as an infrastructure project. If the answer is no, you remain in the non-infrastructure category. Okay, that was a lot of detail, but it's important. We get a lot of questions about where projects fit into what categories and to what the maximum award sizes are. We, of course, are here to continue to answer those questions, but I thought it would be helpful to go through those sort of decision support questions. So now we're going to move on to some of the NBRC policies and requirements. Again, some of these you may have heard yesterday if you participated. There's also a few new little notes in here from based on feedback from yesterday. So there's some new. There's a ton of information again in our program user manual, but specifically around some of these policies, you may want to review the NBRC compliance manual. In the end, it really is the applicant's responsibility to understand all of the policies and requirements associated with NBRC funds, and understanding these can really help with your project development, especially as you put together your project timeline and your project budget. Okay, so we learned how to identify what your reimbursement and match ratio will be earlier based on your location. It would either be an 80-20 reimbursement match ratio, a 50-50 reimbursement match ratio, or what's not listed here is that there could be a multi-county project that brings together different different match rates. And for those counties, it's the average of the reimbursement match ratio across all the counties. for those projects across multiple counties. So this setup of a reimbursement match ratio requires that reimbursements, which is when you're submitting your expenses to NBRC for reimbursement, that those line up with the amount of funds that have been designated as match and cost share, and that you're also spending those funds down. So it's a ratio. It's we look at both the reimbursement side and the match cost share side. And we've had lots of questions in the past about how to calculate your match. The required minimum match is based on the NBRC requested funds. So you will go ahead and multiply that match ratio to the requested funds for your required minimum non-federal match. For your required minimum match. In some cases, you can use federal funds to match. Cost share is the term that we use to describe those project costs that may be above the NBRC requested funds. So sometimes a project requires more funds than are being requested from NBRC. And so the total project costs minus the NBRC requested funds is what we define as cost share. Your match is part of the cost share. And so we'll be asking within the pre-application, we'll talk more about this as well, but you'll want to have a good understanding of your match requirements and the sources that you plan to use as match for your pre-application. And a reminder that match cannot be spent before you receive a notice to proceed. And we'll also touch base on that in a couple slides. Okay, so some of the unique aspects of NBRC funds and the Catalyst program. We have a 3-year period of performance. So if you feel your project can be completed within 3 years, then you're probably in a place that's ready to apply for a Catalyst award. If you think it's going to take longer than 3 years, NBRC suggests applying to a future funding round because we do, again, have that 3-year period of performance. Ineligible purpose. So I mentioned earlier, we cannot, NBRC cannot have funds go towards a for-profit entity. And in addition to that, so a for-profit entity is not an eligible applicant. We also do not allow pass-throughs of funds from an eligible applicant to a for-profit entity. And we have a full description of this in our user manual, as well as a list of other ineligible funding purposes. But that's an important one to highlight. A couple unique things about NBRC funds. We do allow match from other federal funds. So if you have a 50% match requirement, some of those funds, up to 80% of the total project costs, can be made up of federal funds. And so if you have other federal sources, you're going to want to double check with them that it's okay. But NBRC allows other federal funds to be part of that match, up to 80%. NBRC funds can be used to purchase or construct real property, but when that does happen, NBRC requires a federal interest in that property for 20 years. So that's also important to know if you are including construction or major renovations. A note on some of the ineligible costs for for things that you're not able to use NBRC funds on. Some of the categories include maintenance, routine or deferred maintenance are not allowed not allowed to allocate NBRC funds to. Same with allowance or payment of debts. You can't use NBRC funds to apply for a loan. You also can't use NBRC funds to repay a loan. And I mentioned before a notice to proceed. I know we're really far from that stage, but it's important in terms of planning for your timeline and how you are planning for your budget to know that NBRC funds and match cannot be committed, meaning they cannot be, signed up for a contract or, things of that nature, commitment, or spent before receiving a notice to proceed. And in order to get your notice to proceed, NBRC funds require environmental review of the project. The National Environmental Protection Act applies to NBRC funds. And that process is something that we ask for pre-applicant or for interested applicants to account for in their pre-application timeline. NEPA, because it came up yesterday, I added this very brief low-tech summary of the NEPA potential timeline you might want to take into account for your project. There are generally sort of three options that your project may fall into when we're talking about environmental review. The first is a categorical exclusion. And this generally takes, on the order of weeks. And it does not, generally cost much to go through a categorical exclusion process. Then also there's a categorical exclusion plus Section 106 consultation. That's a historical preservation consultation. That takes a little longer, may require some additional funds to satisfy sort of any requirements of the Department of or Division of Historical Resources in New Hampshire. And then the sort of most thorough environmental review process that we generally see happen at NBRC is the environmental assessment. This can take from 6 to 12 months. So it's something that you'll want to, have an idea if that may apply to your project. These are generally for projects that are construction that have some in-ground disturbances or other sort of construction type elements that require us to understand potential impacts on endangered species and things of that nature. So it takes a longer time. It may have a higher budget to complete paperwork or any requirements. So categorical exclusions, I don't think I mentioned, I apologize, are really for projects that don't have a construction or renovation element. So many of our workforce development or training type projects fall within a categorical exclusion. Some projects may require a Section 106 consultation if the project involves historic buildings or historic resources. So hopefully that helps you understand where your project may roughly fall. We will definitely provide you guidance further into the process, but this is important to note for your planning and project development. A reminder again that we do have a federal funding ceiling at NBRC of 80%. So all of the total project costs can only be comprised of 80%, up to 80% federal funds. That means a minimum of 20% needs to be non-federal. And we get a lot of questions about what types of sources are considered federal or not considered federal. So if you have CDBG funds from your state, those do not count towards that federal cap. Loans, so if you have a loan from a federal agency, those do not count towards the federal cap. Okay, and lastly, in this section, NBRC funds are subject to Build American, Buy American. This basically is a domestic content preference for American sourced or manufactured iron and steel, manufactured products, and construction materials. And the BABA, as we lovingly call it, applies primarily to infrastructure projects. NBRC does have a broad interpretation of what is identified as infrastructure. And our definition, as well as lots of guidance, is available on our website. That's important to note that BABA applies to NBRC funds. Okay, the meat of why we're here today. Pre-applications. Here we go. I'll just quickly actually pause. Are there any questions that we want to bring up now related to some of that early content?
Hey, Adrian, it's Sarah. There are a few questions in the chat that I haven't gotten to yet. One of them is NEPA an eligible NBRC expense? Can we use NBRC funds to fund NEPA?
Yes, NEPA is an eligible NBRC funding allocation. So you can dedicate your requested funds from NBRC to NEPA tasks.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit about what defines a federal interest in a built project?
Yeah, so I believe we use the indicator of major renovation. So if you are simply putting in maybe new floors or updating cabinetry, things of that nature, that is likely not considered a major renovation and would likely not be subject to a federal interest. But if you're gutting a place and it's kind of being totally reconfigured, that would rise to the level of a notice of federal interest. And then, of course, if you're purchasing a property, that's also a federal interest.
Okay.
Sarah, it's Andrea. I would just also add that it's not just when we acquire real property, but major renovations, to Adrian's point, above 250,000 is the cap. So if it's less than 250,000, we would not take a federal interest, but we would in any sort of acquisition and or improvements to real property that exceed that 250,000.
And Andrea, can you just explain what people are asking? What does a federal interest mean? So can you explain the mechanism that's used?
Sure. Yeah. So as a federal funder, recognizing these are public dollars, it is our responsibility to protect our investment in these projects. And so the mechanism that we use for equipment is a depreciation schedule. So we also take an interest in equipment until it falls below $5,000. So there's some documentation that a grantee who uses our funding for equipment would have to provide to us. When we get into real property, so acquisition or improvement to real property, that notice of federal interest takes the form of a 20-year notice of federal interest. It's actually a document that is signed and recorded in your registry of deeds. So it is it's we do it a lot. So our funds are often used for real property and or equipment. But when we talk about a notice of federal interest or protecting a federal investment, it's really demonstrating that when we have made an investment of federal dollars, we are protecting that interest at the same time.
I see Dick Henry with his hand raised.
Hi,
Do you
Adrian.
want to?
Thank you very much. I have two quick questions. I have a designated distressed town within an attainment area. What is the match required? Is it 20% or 50%?
An isolated area of distress is a 50% match requirement.
Okay, thank you. And
Sure.
the second question was the $50 million, is that for the entire 4 states or is it just for New Hampshire? And if it's not,
Yes.
if it's for the 4 state, what is New Hampshire's portion of it?
Well, yes, that's a great question. Catalyst distributes its funds equally across the region. So each state will receive an allocation of the final total for the program this year. As I mentioned, right now it's at 50 million, and that would be divided equally across the 4 states. And if we're able to increase that, it will also be divided equally across the states.
Thank you.
Sure. Holly?
Hi, thank you. I just had a question about the 20-year the federal interest protecting federal investments, which is totally makes sense, but I was just kind of curious what it is that they do to protect the federal investment, like what does that like you can't change the usage or you have to have certain reporting, like what is it that you guys do to protect that investment that would require us to, you know.
Yeah, essentially it is that you can't change the use. That's really what it's about, is that it had an intended use when the project was funded, and the NFI is our way of making sure that that intended use is carried through that 20-year period. And if the property were to be, for instance, an entity wanted to transfer the property, that would require permission of NBRC. So it does a number of things, but primarily it is that you can't change the use and you can't transfer the property without NBRC's knowledge and permission.
Okay. Is that detailed anywhere? Just
Yes. Yep. Within our grant administration and compliance manual, which is available on the resources tab of our website, we go into some pretty significant detail about when our money is used for real property and the NFI requirement. There's actually even a sample NFI in the appendix of that same manual.
Okay, fantastic. And that really is the biggest thing, is just the usage change.
The usage change and making sure that, yes, it carries that the entity who received the money is continuing to have ownership of that property. So you can't transfer ownership of the property either under an NFI without our permission.
Yeah, that makes sense. Does it require any, like, we're hoping to build an indoor facility, and I was just curious, like, does it regulate, like, amount is, like, we want to be open to the public free of charge, but does it regulate, like, we have to be open 50% of the time to the general public or anything like that, or?
No requirements in terms of, it's really based on our investment.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Well, great. Well, thank you for those questions. We'll continue to respond to questions in the chat. I want to make sure we get through our pre-application information. So starting off with our timeline for the spring funding round, here we are, the program information sessions. The pre-application system will open in February or early March. And pre-applications are due by March 15th. We have a 5 p.m. Due date, or time that applications are due by. So some federal grants are 11:59 p.m. of the day. NBRC is 5 p.m. of the due date. So that's important to note. Again, all of the waivers we talked about are due with the pre-application, and NBRC will provide responses back during the week of March 25th. So you can see we've committed to a pretty quick turnaround of reviewing the pre-applications so that you are aware of kind of your pre-application status within 2 weeks of submitting. And as I mentioned, the pre-applications must be submitted with NBRC's online grants management system. We are in the final throes of getting that system ready. And so our plan is to release really detailed guidance as well as technical support resources to you all any sort of day now. We're really excited. I'm going to point out in a few different ways where we've been able to make some improvements from our previous online application system. The pre-applications, our system will require you to register, and I'll go through the information that it will ask there. And it will also ask you to respond to a few pre-application questions, and we're going to go through those now as well. All of this information, as it becomes available, will be added to our program user manual, in particular part 2, where it says pre-application requirements or guidance. And so as part of your registration, this is the majority of the information you'll be asked for. You'll be asked to identify yourself as an organization, contact information for your organization, to select the organization type. So remember, we went over the eligible applicant types. You'll be able to select sort of what applies to your organization. Your EIN, your identification number, as well as, if it's available, your unique entity ID. If you have a UEI, please enter it during registration. If you do not have it, that's okay. It's not required to submit a pre-application, but that number will be required to receive an NBRC award. So that's really the bulk of the information that will be asked for as part of the registration process. And then once that registration is approved by NBRC, you'll be able to access all of the pre-applications for all of our NBRC funding programs. So if you're interested in Catalyst, you'll have access to that. But also if you have a project that you're interested in for one of our other programs, you'll have access after registration. So some of the information you'll be asked for during the pre-application. Some of it will look similar to our letter of interest information that we asked for last year. You may recognize some of these applicant characteristics. You'll be able to self-identify if you've had a previous award with NBRC. And if you have had a previous award with NBRC, you'll be asked to enter your NBRC award number. All of these questions are required for you to answer. However, if you don't happen to have your NBRC award number available, that's okay. We ask for it so that, again, we can kind of track that 75% expenditure requirement. And it's always helpful if we have your exact award reference available. You'll be asked to identify if your project is serving a rural community, with a population of less than 5,000. And similarly, you'll be asked if your project is serving a disadvantaged community. This is we have a definition for disadvantaged communities in our program user manual in the definitions section. And I will say it's a broader definition than we had last year. You'll be asked to identify the primary place of performance. This is really where the project will take place. We're not looking for the address of your organization. we're really looking for the specific place a project will happen. So you'll be given the chance to enter an address, including a zip code, the county where the project will take place, as well as if you have them available, you can even enter your lat long coordinates. So we're really looking for specific information on where the project will happen. You'll also be asked for a project title. NBRC doesn't really provide guidance on what the project title should be, but generally it does include the applicant organization's name. So maybe you've got, town of somewhere's wastewater treatment plant. That would be, a typical title we see. No need to get creative and fluffy with your titles, unless you want to. Okay, so as part of the pre-application, you'll be asked for budget information. There are two parts to the budget requirements for the pre-application. One is a budget narrative. Again, if you've applied for Catalyst in the past, you may be familiar with the budget narrative. This is where we ask you to describe and justify expenses over $5,000. There will also be a table within the budget narrative that asks you to describe your match sources. So is your match federal or non-federal source? It'll ask for the type of match. So is it a loan, a grant, or another type of match, maybe a private donation? It will also ask for the status of the match, whether the match is committed, and you'll provide the date of commitment, or whether the match is pending or applied for, not yet committed. And you'll want to also share the anticipated date of commitment. This is no longer, or will no longer be a document that you attach and submit. This is part of our pre-application system. So that we feel like is a big improvement from previous years. You'll also be asked for budget details. So I'll go through the budget categories that we'll be requesting, but essentially we'll be looking for you to break down your NBRC requested funds and your match and cost share funds across budget categories. And of course, that will provide us with the total project costs as well. These are the budget categories that will be available for you to complete. You'll see that they align with the SF424 CBW budget document, but the pre-applications themselves do not require the SF424 CBW form. That form will be required for the full application, but this approach gives us the information we really need without having to upload the SF424 CBW form. So it's really similar, but it's integrated into our application system. There are 5 narrative questions that are part of the pre-application. And we will be adding guidance, this guidance that I provide here, to our Catalyst program user manual. But I'll walk through it now because that's, I think, why we're all here. Each of the narrative questions have a 10,000 character limit. That's actually quite a bit of space. I think in the past, we've had a much lower character limit. So I think that's really exciting to give you some additional space to share about your project. And I would really encourage you to develop that narrative in a separate word processing document. Make that available when you go into the pre-application to copy and paste into the narrative boxes. Okay, the project abstract. Um, this is where we're really looking for you to provide a summary of your proposed project, and hitting on some of the elements we've talked about today. What project category does your project fit within? Describe the status of your project. Kind of, are you ready to go? Are you in the planning process? Are you in the early stages? Or are we kind of last into funding and you're just looking for this last bit of money to make your project happen? And overall, what is your project scope and how long do you think it will take to complete? So again, these questions will be part of our program manual, but this is the information we're looking for as part of your project abstract. The second narrative question is asking you to describe your economic outcomes, your expected economic outcomes for the project. And we actually have a long list of example economic outcomes and outputs in Appendix G of our manual. So if you're not quite sure what I'm referring to in terms of economic outcomes, that's where you can go to get an idea of what we're looking for. We're also looking for you to describe the scale of those expected impacts on your community, on your county, or the broader region. This is, again, is a narrative opportunity for you to share what you see coming out of your project as a result of your project. The third narrative question is, how does your project align with program investment priorities? So when we were talking about the NBRC, well, we actually haven't gotten there yet, but when we do talk about the NBRC investment priorities and the state program priorities, this is where you want to really describe how your project supports those priorities. And that's where we'll be looking for that information as we evaluate pre-applications. Of course, our priorities and the scoring criteria for the Catalyst program in general are available in our user manual. The fourth question, if I'm counting right, is related to who will benefit from this project and how this project sort of serves your community or why it matters to your community. This is also a great place to describe how your project may serve or benefit rural communities in particular, or disadvantaged communities. And this is also a place where you can describe if your project supports climate resilience for your community. And I believe the fifth question, the last narrative question, is your statement of need. And this is really where you can describe the challenge your project is addressing, what your solution is, and why this project is important to fund right now, why NBRC funding is important to this project, and really the opportunities that are gained by funding this project. If your project if you've determined your project is eligible for the higher maximum infrastructure funding amount, we also ask that you describe how your project meets that criteria, and also describe how the funds will be allocated to either the 2 or more infrastructure categories or the 2 or more jurisdictions. So in addition to understanding if your project qualifies or can be classified as a higher maximum infrastructure project, we also ask you to describe how you arrived at that determination. Okay, I'm actually going to stop there because I see a raised hand and we've been able to go through all of the pre-application questions, but I don't want to take too much time because I also want to be able to get to the program priorities and to hearing from Steve. Micah, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Last year we applied and there's sort of like two main issues. Um, Site control of the property is it's owned by the city and the value of the property would be the in-kind match. So last year we ran into the issue of successfully getting the grant without actually having the site control. So I'm wondering if there's like a way that cities can work with I don't know, our nonprofit or something to try and make sure the project can get started without basically losing the value of the match by getting site control first before we had the notice to proceed.
Yeah, so I think that's again maybe a pretty specific question, but I think site control overall is something we look for in terms of readiness. Um, and there could be ways to share the intended commitment with NBRC through a letter of support, through documentation of a planned donation. I think maybe we could take that offline, but those are
Yeah,
two things that come to mind
thank you.
right now. If you would like to also send that specific question to admin@nbrc.gov, we can be sure to get you a response that way. I've noted it here, but it would also be good to have a record of the question through our admin email.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. And one more question. Dick, I see you have your hand raised.
Sorry to ask you again, but they told
That's
me in
okay.
the chat to ask you. Um,
Okay.
if we're doing a project, can we use the Inflation Reduction Act direct pay to nonprofits as match to the NBRC grant up to the 80% limit?
Yeah, so my understanding is that IRA funds would be classified as a federal funding source. And again, if you're within that 80%, um, within that 80% cap, I would say yes. But yeah, I believe so.
Shall I send it to admin@nbrc.gov just so you have a record?
You're welcome to. Yes, that would be great.
Adrian, the one other
Oh,
thing I
sorry.
would note on that is when we talk about committed funds, it's possible that an entity has, dollars sitting in their bank account that they're hoping to use as match or cost share, but it's critically important that those funds have not been committed for any other purpose. So there's been several questions in the chat specific to, what can be used as match and meeting cost share, and just so understand, or folks understand, what we mean by committed match means that you have those funds in hand and they are not committed to any other source. And you can't expend any of those funds until you receive the notice to proceed. So they kind of have to be set aside and used for this one specific purpose and then documented to us when you get to that notice to proceed portion of the program, as they say, which is quite a ways down the road, but just critical to understand what we mean by committed match and what can serve as matching cost share. So to Dick's question, important that those dollars sit with that entity. They can't be something that may come along later. It would have to be dollars that sit within that entity's sort of coffers, or that there's some sort of letter of commitment of the amount. So we would be looking for that kind of documentation to consider a committed match and cost share.
Thank you for adding that. Okay, let's continue on to sort of the evaluation, understanding how pre-applications will be evaluated. As I mentioned earlier, there's sort of two parts. One is evaluating a pre-application for eligibility factors, and the other is considering a project's alignment with funding priorities. And we we'll go through the state and NBRC priorities for Catalyst in a few slides from now. But in general, that's sort of the overarching evaluation process of the pre-applications. We may also consider the costs and expected benefits associated with the NBRC requested investment. And we may also consider the benefits provided to the broader community and region. And so all of those sort of factors are asked to be described within the narrative that we went through for the pre-applications as well. NBRC has a scoring criteria rubric that has 5 different elements that we review applications for. We have one of those scoring criteria is alignment with NBRC investment priorities. And again, that is an element we use for reviewing pre-applications is alignment with investment priorities. And so here are the 3 NBRC investment priorities. Some of them will look quite familiar at this point in the presentation because I've hit on them in a couple different ways. Again, we're looking for investments that benefit rural communities with populations of less than 5,000 and disadvantaged communities, with the definition for that being in our user manual. We're looking for projects that address multiple needs across infrastructure and non-infrastructure categories. So we're really looking for projects that are able to demonstrate efficiencies from including multiple categories in one project. I know we've talked a little bit about that concept as part of the higher maximum infrastructure determination, but we're also interested in projects that may incorporate, we're interested in prioritizing projects that may incorporate non-infrastructure and infrastructure categories or multiple non-infrastructure categories into one project. Again, with that purpose really being potential efficiencies that come from looking at a more holistic solution to a need. And then the third is projects that adapt to changing climate conditions and extreme weather, and really prioritizing projects that help communities build resilience to these types of impacts. Okay, Steve, you've hung on there for a long time. I'm going to have you come off mute if you would like to talk a bit about the state program's role in project development and reviewing pre-applications.
Yeah, thank you, Adrienne. And thanks,
Sure.
Andrea and Sarah in the background for fielding all the questions and getting great responses out. And I saw a couple participants answering other participants' questions. So it's all about community building. So thank you all. Great to see so many of my partners in ongoing way here. For those that I've not had the pleasure to meet quite yet, I am the Administrator of Rural Economic Development for the state of New Hampshire at the Department of Business and Economic Affairs. And as part of that role, I have the honor and privilege to serve as the State Program Manager for Northern Border Regional Commission and work with these fine folks at the federal level. So real quickly, here's our map. If you have any questions, I think particularly for Grafton County, let me know and I can send you this map. But that just, I had our GIS department break down Grafton County so that the eligible communities, those isolated areas of distress, pop right out at us. So let me know afterward. I'll drop my email address into the chat. Let me know if you could benefit from that. And then, yeah, scoring criteria. Do you have that queued up, Adrienne or Sarah? Yeah, so here's, and I think Adrienne said this earlier, there's sort of eligibility and then there's competitiveness. And this is where we get to the competitiveness part. You're in an eligible area, you are an eligible entity, and here's where we're going to, where the rubber hits the road, if you will, on, accessing the funding that we have available. NBRC has 50 points, as Adrienne said, and we have 50 at the state level. I have a review team that takes a look at all applications. And here is the scoring criteria that we give either 10 or 5 points for 10, the first 3 bullets, 5 for the final 4 bullets that you see on the list here. The key things are that, I feel we're looking for alignment between your project and other strategic plans that are out there. Our economic recovery and expansion strategy at the state level, your regional SEDS that your local regional planning commission is the keeper of, and a few of our friends around the state are on from those RPCs, we call them. You can access that at your local, your region's planning commission, or a state or a local or town plan. And as many of those you can reference, our project is going to advance these plans that are already in place, the stronger and more competitive you will be. In the directly or indirectly support quality jobs, in the description that you'll see in the program manual, we made one seemingly subtle, it's one word change from the past, but I think it's significant. We inserted the word ecosystem. So are you contributing not necessarily directly to the creation of jobs, but your project will help to build an ecosystem that makes your community, your region more inviting to a business to relocate or expand, for potential employees to relocate because you've got amazing outdoor recreation assets in your community, things, arts and culture resources, things like that. So that's the significant change. We're looking for an asset-based approach. So how are you using the assets that are already existing in your community? And then because I'm with you right now from little old Alstead, New Hampshire, in the Monadnock region, and lived here for 32 years, and I understand the limitations that we have at a municipal level. And so on the demonstrates organizational capacity, keep in mind that that might be through partnerships. It might be through, other parties that you've invited to the table, if you will, with your project to get it done. So it's not just about what your 3 select board members like I have and your part-time person at the town office. Who else is going to make sure that you get this done? And to that point, I just wanted to point out a little differently than when it's dropped in the chat. Here in New Hampshire, we do things a little bit differently with the upfront support. And we're very pleased I'm pleased to be able to report that for the 3rd year in a row, our Net Development Group, based in Concord, but with coaches around the state, has won the grant award, the contract for our capacity building services. And I'll ask Stuart Arnett, who's on, to, among other team members, to drop the intake form URL into the chat, so you know how to put your project in front of Stuart and his team, and they're available to help you coach on the front end. And as has been pointed out before, the good news for a small town like mine in Alstead, we also are going to provide support on the other end through, you're going to build into your grant proposal in your budget 2% to go toward your local development district to help you with grant management. And both NBRC and the state of New Hampshire will also be at your side, but we have these external partners that we've developed to help support you in taking your vision all the way through reality. And then lastly, on a personal level, just want to thank you for all you do in your community. And I just a quick shout out to demonstrate how important it is. One of our participants right now on this call had a huge impact on my personal life, my family life, and my community's life 50 years ago in the Lakes region of New Hampshire. So thank you, Dick Tapley, for all you've done. But what you do matters, and I just want to make sure you know that the state of New Hampshire, Department of Business Economic Affairs, and our partners are here to support you along the way. Anything else for me, Adrian? Nope. Thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you, Steve. And I appreciate you going through the state priorities and informing folks about where to emphasize how their projects align with those priorities. So after you've submitted your pre-application during the week of March 25th, applicants will receive a notification of the status of that pre-application. And right now it's looking like one of 3 responses will apply. You'll either be issued an invitation to apply, which will include information on how to access the application and the application details in terms of additional questions and information. You may be provided with a recommendation to resubmit your pre-application for a future funding round. And this would include any feedback from your state program or NBRC on any areas that may need to be tweaked or changed or clarified in a future round. Or you may receive an ineligibility determination. Hopefully that's not likely because we've gone through so much of the eligibility information. But if that does apply, there will also be an explanation as to why your project was determined ineligible. So the week of March 25th, you should expect to see one of those responses to your pre-application. And in terms of what's next for you to do, if you haven't already, I highly recommend going into that website that may have just been dropped in the chat by Stu. You're going to want to confirm your eligibility based on the factors we reviewed today. You're going to want to self-classify your project and understand your award maximum eligibility. You're going to want to self-evaluate your proposed project against those NBRC and state priorities. And again, if you need more information or discussion about your project in terms of how it aligns with state priorities, you would want to fill out that technical assistance intake website form for New Hampshire. If you have questions about eligibility, you're welcome to reach out to NBRC as well. And in terms of what's next for us at NBRC, we will be working to get that grants management system information out to you all, along with the technical resources to use that system. And we'll be updating our program manual with the pre-application details that we went over today. And with that, we have 7 more minutes available for questions. And I encourage you all to, take advantage of your time here with Steve and NBRC staff if you have some additional questions.
Adrian, if I can hop in again, please, on a different topic, but I do want everyone to understand, and I apologize if it was mentioned earlier, Catalyst is a reimbursable grant. And again, I've run small nonprofits, live in a small town, and I know that can be a challenge. So I want people to have time and get coaching on how that can be accomplished, because it can, obviously. But we will, NBRC rather, will reimburse as a project leader spends down the dollars from us.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so you can all see each other's faces in case any questions come up. Was there anything in the chat that we should bring up, Sarah?
I think, okay, so how am I gonna ask that? The funding.
I think, Adrian, there was a question about when does the 3-year period of performance start?
That starts from the award date in your grant agreement. So there are a few steps between now and then, but you will be issued a grant agreement, and that start date is the official start of the project performance period.
How do I wave my hand again?
Adrian, this is Andrea. I would just add, I know for people who are used to this program, they're used to this start date always being October 1st. But with us now running the program twice a year, I would say we're looking at probably September 1 for the spring round and January 1 of next year for the fall round. Just roughing out a couple of months' time between award and all the things we need to do before we start issuing grant agreements. So I wouldn't write that down in ink, but that's roughly what we're roughing out in terms of what it will look like with a multi-entry point year ahead.
Great, thank you, Andrea.
But I have a question. You talk about that you're going to update the various manuals. So if we've downloaded the manual already from the website, that means that we need to go back and download it again?
Right, so you will see in the program manual, in particular, part 2 of the Catalyst Program User Manual, there's a section on the pre-application that we did not have all of the details from our grants management system at the time that that manual was published. And it says basically more information will be added. And that is where we will add that information. So the rest of the manual before part 2 should remain the same, but part 2 will be updated with the details that we talked about today.
And will we be notified when that happens so that we can check? Since you have our email addresses?
Yes, I can do that. I can send an email out to everyone that was registered for the webinar today when that is updated.
Thank you.
June, I would say we probably will be doing that because we know we're going to need to do some grants management system training as well. So there's more to come on that piece as well. So yes, we plan to continue to do a lot of outreach over the next couple of weeks.
Can we just jump in if we have a question or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so in regards to if we were to be awarded the grant, you mentioned something during your presentation that I just wanted to clarify. You said something about if we were to be awarded funding, obviously would need the match, and that we couldn't spend that match until we were made aware of the award. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, so if we have the matching funds committed already and we apply for this and we use those funds to be the match, we just wouldn't be able to spend that matching money until we were awarded, if we were obviously awarded funding. Could we start spending any money towards the project, or is it just that matching funds that can't be expended prior to?
Yeah, so great question. Any projects, any funds associated with your project application and your project award cannot be committed in the form of a contract for services or spent before receiving the notice to proceed. So it's not actually before receiving the award, it's before receiving the notice to proceed, which is you know, a point in the grant process where it's sort of the official permission. Yes, everything's in order for you to start spending and receiving reimbursements. So does that answer your
in a
question?
way, yeah. Right now our organization is exploring whether or not this project is feasible for us. So we have some funding, not the matching funding that we've solicited specifically for the building of this project, but we've secured funds to explore designs and having to do some of the testing in our facility to make sure we could actually do it here. Yeah. Though preliminary design work is being done right now, but nothing infrastructurally is being done.
Yeah, so you can of course do the planning and design. That would not be eligible towards the match for the project though. So you could either build it into your project and include that as part of the process and not move forward with those tasks until you receive the notice to proceed. Or you could do that as sort of phase one, and those funds are not available to be claimed as match or cost share for that project.
So essentially, if we're applying for these funds, we just want to pull out, yeah, phase one, create phase one here, and then phase two would be like the actual building. So we wouldn't really want to proceed with anything. So as far as like, I guess it's it's trying to think of like, you know, obviously you guys want projects that are ready to go. And would we be able to, we just can't break ground, or we can't sign anything saying we want to move forward the project unless we get approval?
Yeah, so our procurement processes in terms of you know, selecting contractors for services, that requires open and fair competition. And so for NBRC funds, if you've already committed to a contractor or to a particular set of services, those, if it's before the notice to proceed, those would not be eligible for NBRC reimbursement. Again, it's always taking from that notice to proceed, that time of notice to proceed and forward, for reimbursement and for committing funds. So you could potentially go through an RFP process, but you would not be able to actually select and sign a contract with a contractor.
So what is the, is there, I'm sure it's somewhere in this information where we would, the open and fair competition, like how would we figure out? How would we, because obviously we want to make sure, you know, in this day and age with supplies and stuff not always being available on time.
Yeah, all of our procurement requirements are outlined in that administration and compliance manual that Andrea referenced earlier. It's available on our resources tab. And really all of this comes from the federal code around procurement processes to CFR 200. But we summarize them and provide links to those regulations within that compliance manual.
Okay, thank you.
Adrienne, let me get one thing in back to you said a minute ago about updates. For all the people listening, understand what NBRC is doing here. They have a very flexible program that's changing very rapidly behind them. They just went from one round to two. They're getting 3 or 4 new statutory requirements placed on them. So there's a lot of churn that they're trying their very best to stay up with. I think if you wait for them to tell you that they've changed things, they will, but that's maybe too late. I would be checking the FAQ daily if you're serious about going ahead, and I'd be scheduling some time to talk to your LDDs and whatever. This is a very fast moving program. They just moved it up a month. There's more complexity to it. So I would stay on top at minimum the FAQ and don't wait for them to send you something. By the way, this is, we work with 6 federal agencies and none of the rest of them do this. This is the second of 5 sessions like this. They are remarkably responsive to questions and stuff. But read the manuals and stuff because this is a fast moving program. My plug.
Thanks, Stu. Lois, do you have a question?
I do. Assuming that installing a ground level solar array would count as construction, and would require NEPA, could you sort of, I thought it sounded like we would not be able to use NBRC funds because you have to do your NEPA before you get a notice to proceed. How would that work? How would we use match and NBRC funds for our NEPA study?
Sure.
How does that work?
Yeah, sure. This is, you know, definitely getting down the road, but just for purposes of understanding how our process works, which is really important. The notice to proceed is sort of our official permission to move forward with the project. If there are some, you know, expenses that are associated with NEPA environmental review process, or you know, the project has a longer timeline before you're going to receive that approval and you need some support from your local development district, we can review your project and you can request what's called a partial notice to proceed for those LDD costs and or for those NEPA costs. Those are approved, NBRC funding items or funding costs, project costs. So you are eligible to go ahead and move forward with those tasks if you request what we call a partial notice to proceed for those activities. Not all activities within your project are eligible for that sort of partial notice to proceed. It's really limited to basically the LDD grant administration costs, any costs that have been identified to move through the environmental review process. Holly, do you have another question or is your hand from earlier? Okay. Great. Well, I realize we're a few minutes over, but we never worry about going over for questions. Is there anything else that we can answer while we're here with you today? And if not, we'll make sure this chat box, which looks like it has a ton of back and forth going on that I haven't been privy to, will be shared and posted, as well as, again, today's recording. We continue to add to that FAQ that Stu mentioned, and we'll continue to update our resources as more information is available.
I have one quick question, and I'm
Sure.
in the competition, like the open and fair competition section. I'm kind of reading through it now for the first time. And I just wondered if you could generally answer the question, or like, we have someone that we're working with. I know another organization in our community got funding from you guys and worked with the same engineer firm. So is it like, I'm just wondering, like, if we decided to move forward and we didn't, and it was phase 2 in the building, we wanted to use them, but we didn't sign anything until, if we were to get funding, we didn't sign anything until we obviously received notice to proceed. Could we, how do we know if we can use the people we're communicating with now versus someone else? I mean,
Right. So this comes up a lot. It's a really good question. Because we do require that open and fair competition, generally for services or other purchases, we require, so for purchases of equipment or smaller purchases, I believe it's actually called a small purchase, that we ask for you to go out and get quotes or estimates for a larger contract for services. We require either an RFQ or an RFP process. And so sometimes that process does not end up with the person that you're already working with. Like, it's not a guarantee that it's going to work out that way. We can't approve what we would call a sole source contract with someone that you've already just simply because you already have a relationship or they're knowledgeable of the project. So it can be tricky when you have a relationship with an existing service provider and fitting them into different phases of the project. We really do require that competition for the NBRC for the federal funds.
what is that? You
So
said RFQ, and what was the other thing?
yeah, oh, sorry, request for qualifications or request for proposals. And those are outlined, I believe, in our manual as well, in terms of what elements make for a fair and open competition, in terms of not including things in your bid materials that are really specific to one entity that no other person could possibly satisfy. If there's a list of kind of like best practices that we would expect.
Okay.
Hey, Adrian, I just wanted to remind folks that if you are selected for funding, invited for funding, we offer additional information sessions. So we will get into more detail about the application process at that point. So If you don't understand it all right now, that's okay. Focus on the pre-application. We will get into more details about the application and award process later.
That's a great note, Sarah. Well, great. Well, I will remind you all of our admin, ADMIN at nbrc.gov email address. If you have questions that come up after today, you can send them there. And please take a look at our resources. And I really appreciate you attending today. And I hope it was helpful. And Steve, I see you're off mic. I don't know if you want to say any last parting words.
No, just thank you for being here, and thank you to the NBRC team for doing such a good job coaching our New Hampshire municipal and nonprofit leaders. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.